right, good morning, everyone. We're all very excited to be here today. I'm your moderator this morning. My name is Nicole Stallings Bates. I work here in Detroit in the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development. So very, very pleased to be here and excited about this conversation that's so important, particularly here in the city as we look to really create long-term opportunity for Detroit residents. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists and we'll get right to it. So first, we have Andrew Dunckelman from Google.org. Next, we have Lavea Brachman from the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation. Following that, we have Guillermo Miranda from IBM. And then finally, right here to my right, we have Jose Garcia from the Ford Foundation. So we're going to start and kick things off by having each panelist talk a little bit about how they believe philanthropy should, and particularly how their own organizations are approaching the complex set of issues related to the future of work and how they can best benefit the communities that they serve. So we'll start down at the front, right there.
Sure. Well, first of all, good morning. Thank you so much for having us. It's been a lot of fun to sit in on the panels so far, and there's a high bar to live up to, so we'll do our best. I'm Andrew Dunckelman with Google.org. We're Google's Philanthropy, and in that role, I lead our work on education and economic opportunity, including a multi-year $50 million initiative focused on the future of work, which we call our Google.org Work Initiative. We really set out to look at the future of work after people were asking many of the big questions that they've been asking this morning about how work was changing. And we felt that a broader conversation was needed beyond just automation and artificial intelligence to look at a number of the forces that have been discussed today related to job quality, the social safety net, the gig economy, demographics in this country. And so we really wanted to take an expansive view of the whole set of issues related to future of work. I think with regard to what philanthropy can do, I speak in a little bit of a position that Guillermo does too, which is as a corporate philanthropist, and obviously we have a certain set of constraints that involve being part of a business, and how can we both advance social impact as well as advance the goals of Google as a company. And so we really think about, my starting line is, what do we know well? I think that there is, when we started this work, we were funding everything from worker power and worker voice all the way to the earned income tax credit to skills. And I think as we've evolved through that journey, we've figured out where Google can add the most value. And I really see a few areas. One is work related to the digital economy. So Mark earlier was talking about some of his research, and he's provided some findings that digital content of jobs has increased dramatically in the last 15 years. So we're thinking about, what do we as an employer know about the digital economy, and how can we help traditional providers, how can we help educational institutions and nonprofits to respond to that? We've partnered with groups like Goodwill to build their capacity to understand digital opportunities in their communities and improve their talent and labor market data, their curricula to respond to that. The second set of things for us is around data. And so we recognize that there's a massive need to better understand how work is changing, how programs are providing outcomes for people. And so we've invested in data standards to improve the quality of understanding how programs are leading to meaningful earnings impact on workers. Like at the end of the day, and if the work that we're doing isn't driving tangible returns in terms of worker income and financial security, then it's in my view, sort of not really worth it. And then the third set of things that we know pretty well is technology. And so we've invested a lot in catalytic technological solutions, bringing in not just our money, but our Googlers to partner with technical innovators. So we've worked with groups like the National Domestic Workers Alliance, building out their platform which is called Lavea, for a portable benefits system for house cleaners and workers. So these are a few areas where for us we can add value. We could talk lots more about the appropriate role for philanthropy in society. This probably could get us on a real tangent. So I'll just stop there and turn it over.
Good morning. It's great to be here. I'm Lavea Brachman, and I'm Vice President of Programs at the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, which is here in Detroit. I manage our young adults and working families portfolio, and it's great to be here with everybody on the panel. So we're a little unusual. So we are located here in Detroit. We are fairly new. We fund only in Southeast Michigan and Western New York because of the origins of our foundation. We are spend down, so we will be spending our funding, our corpus over the next 15 years. It was a 20-year spend down, but we're almost 5 years into it. So that really guides a lot of how we think about what we're doing, because we know we won't be around 15 years from now, which is actually a very interesting challenge to have. We've also taken some time to evaluate where we want to be funding in the workforce space. And like you, like Google, it's good to hear that you have evolved, because we're evolving too all the time. But our North Star is upward mobility to middle skill, middle wage jobs. And that's really guiding us in all ways in terms of how we look at our funding and what we think are our priorities. And we're focused on funding training programs for those who are getting post-secondary kinds of training, but not four-year college degrees. So that's really our sweet spot. Beyond that, we have several intervention points that we've identified, and as I said, we're still evolving, and I think if you talk to us in another year, we'll have consolidated some of these. But being fairly new, this is our starting point. So the first bucket is focused on funding career tech ed programs and early middle college kinds of programs in our high schools, and some of those are in conjunction with community colleges. Some of those are CTE programs, and we have funded several here in Detroit. The second is actually looking at the role that community colleges can be playing in a bigger way in connecting workers with the right kinds of skills that they need for these 21st century jobs. The third area is apprenticeships, and a good example there is youth apprenticeship we're particularly focused on. We are focused on young adults, so 16 to 24, but also upskilling for those who are beyond 24 years of age. We are also interested in funding sort of cross-cutting, so that would mean what are the kinds of, when we're looking at programs to fund, we want to be thinking about how to embed lifelong learning skills, employability skills. We did some really interesting focus groups when we were first starting out that, not surprised to probably most of the people in the room here, but revealed how important it is, and increasingly important with technology, for those human-centered skills, those team-building skills, management skills, leadership skills, and we want to see those embedded in so many of the programs that we're looking at. So I'd say that's something that we're really trying to add to our equation and to the conversation when we're talking about any kinds of future of work and skills training. Finally, and this really is overarching throughout all, and something that we feel is important, a thread through all of this is you really have to be working closely with employers. Here in Detroit, here in Southeast Michigan, we can talk more about this in a few minutes, but it's so important that employers reveal more about what their training needs are. We see a real disconnect between supply and demand, supply of workers with the right kinds of skills. Jobs are going unfilled in this tight labor market. So we're trying very hard to work with CEOs and others and convince folks to come to the table in a more collaborative kind of way than maybe has been done in the past. And I think, we'll probably get into this more, but I think that is a particular role of philanthropy, is calling tables where people maybe can sit in a room that may not have done that before, and we see that we can all be working more closely together to launch a more competitive economy for Southeast Michigan.
Fantastic. So, good morning, everybody. Look, I'm going to be a little provocative, and there are three things that I can say on behalf of IBM and the IBM social impact area that I lead. First, don't throw cash at the problem. The solution will not come just throwing cash at the problem. You need to think what is behind the problem. There are several initiatives, well-intended, where you just put cash and not necessarily works. So it has to be more than putting cash behind. Second thing is, don't treat this different than the biggest commercial opportunities that you have an enterprise. Let's use the same techniques that we use for our clients. Let's start with user centricity. So what really the workers need, what the students need. Let's understand the user. Then let's move to co-creation, partnerships. The solution is not going to come from the moon. The solution needs to be created at local level. The solution needs to be something that everybody agrees. If not, you are going to be doing change management, which when you co-create, you don't need change management. It's assumed from the beginning. And then let's deliver the solution on the modern form of digital multimodal experiences. The world of education and work has been separated because of the tendency of how we have grown society. And there is a fantastic academia set of accomplishment and fantastic industry commercial accomplishment. At the end of the day, we work because we got some knowledge, we got some skills, and we want to reflect it in an everyday life. The third thing that is important is let's start with curiosity. Curiosity, long life learning are the drivers of how the future will look like. 100% of the jobs will change. Our jobs will change, are changing. But if you don't put the concept of curiosity, the understanding of continuous learning, we can be debating for years and nothing will happen. So don't throw cash at the problem only. Use the same techniques and tools that you use in your commercial engagement. User centricity, co-creation, partnership, deliver in an agile way with multimodal learning experiences. And finally, be sure that it starts with curiosity. It starts with this mindset of lifelong learning. And this is the way that we have done some of our programs in high school, community college, etc. And this is the way also that we do it globally. IBM is a global company. So some of the examples that has been extremely successful in other places in the world, we are bringing also to the US.
Thank you, Guillermo. And thank you for those important three ways of looking at this. I think at Ford, I want to start with what Guillermo said, which is close to 2 years ago at Ford Foundation, we had a program around quality work, economic security, and that was our North Star. And as part of our refinement strategy, we started looking actually at these areas that have been emerging and clearly due to the changing nature of work around the future of work. And I think one of the first things that I think philanthropy have to do is listen, right? We talk with academics, we talk with people, policy experts, workers, and other. And what we have found out as we were looking at this is three main things. That our thinking that precarity was a huge and fundamental issue of how work is organized today, it still exists. And technology actually was facilitating that, particularly in low-wage sectors, retail, domestic work, taxi drivers, right? All the different sectors, warehouse workers, all those different sectors that actually were actually growing part of the service economy. That is the area that have been expanding. So that have actually continued to be a critical part, but clearly the second point is that technology is not something we need to ignore, right? Technology is actually a fundamental way that innovation happen, productivity actually facilitated, and in speed. So what should be the role on a foundation to actually to facilitate not only the knowledge base that I think people in labor, as we heard this morning, people in policy circles, need to actually get smarter about to actually integrate that as part of the conversation. I think conversation, for example, about surveillance is an important conversation. Data that actually is being captured. Who owns that data of workers that is being captured through different platforms? Not only the transparency, but I think is a different way actually making money. And we don't know enough actually to have the solutions, but I think those are patterns that we have to be actually looking at it. Not only the patterns in terms of how people get jobs, but actually how people are treated in job based on different technology, and who actually that technology is actually assisting, right? Is it assisting clearly to increase productivity? Are the workers actually benefiting from that, which actually have been helpful to do that? But clearly still a conversation of wages, benefits, and other ways that actually, and economic security is another critical part of that. Small example in the conversation of technology here is on-time scheduling, right? Is a huge level of insecurity that provide to worker. Imagine that you're basically on call all the time. And not only you're working one job, but you're working 3 jobs, right? Imagine actually that scheduling software actually take data point of people, and that you have to pick up your daughter, and that you actually have to take care of your parents, and so on. That way, technology actually could be helpful for families and actually for the economy at large if we actually treat it that way and change the power, I think the power dynamic who making the decision. And that goes to my third point, the importance, we find out the importance of actually worker being part of the conversation. Not only part of the conversation, and for that, workers not only have to have voice in the workplace, but actually also have the power to actually be in relationship with employers, with policymakers, and others, right, that are part of making these decisions. In the way that we actually facilitate the conversation, and I think a role that philanthropy can play is a conversation between firms, right, financial markets, policymakers and workers, right? And make it all part of an important conversation and ensure that those voices are there. Because clearly the voices of workers are not only important for this, but important actually to develop the solutions that actually will be helpful for our economy and for people, right? And particularly in those sectors that actually we have the biggest group of low-income communities and communities of color. So I think that's a clear way as we think about it. And for that, I think we clearly work in area of worker voice, policy, and actually bringing all these different sectors together to actually have a broader conversation and build consensus around rational issues that actually can help our economy and clearly workers.
That's great. And I think one of the things I love about our panelists is that they all come to this work from pretty different perspectives. And you can see that there's so many different angles at which you could attack this topic. Technology, programmatic solutions, and policy. And so one thing I'd love to explore next is really how do we think that philanthropy can start to help inform policy that starts to really move the needle. I don't know if we want to kick it back to you, Jose, or someone else wants to start.
Look, I think that it's important to have philanthropy and contributions into a problem that is a way to define some of the basic foundations of how society will work in the future. And there are different kinds of societies. If you are here talking about the US, historically philanthropy has played a very important role in how it has evolved and how it has made contributions to society. But let me also come back to the role of industry, because industry, and we just mentioned this about our responsibility of running a corporate endowment and a corporate social impact initiatives. The budget that I get every year, $400 million to spend on education and skills, comes from the P&L of IBM. This is not a millionaire that says this is an endowment, do good for the world. It comes from the P&L of IBM. This is money that instead of going to our shareholders, goes to society, because we believe on that. So there is a role that industry can play to catalyze some of these things. And if you combine this and use the magic of partnerships and collaborations, you can get many things. I think the specific money that can come from social impact initiatives, philanthropy, or social investments that is growing more and more as important, are catalyzers that can drive action. And this is a very complex problem, so there is no one solution. I think that the way that this will evolve is there are different solutions, and there are solutions that are going to work in this specific locality or in the other specific locality, and the challenges are very different. You go to San Francisco, it's a fantastic booming city with the highest level of homeless in this country. Why? There is something that is not working at local level. You go to Baton Rouge, and you have a different set of challenges. We open a delivery center there, and we are helping at local level. So I think this magic of partnership and collaboration, and there is the force of the investment behind that can drive actions into the right direction. But again, don't think on a single solution. The marketplace will define different solutions, and we will find ways to advance society as a whole and be aware that this is something that we have to tackle.
For me, we've actually taken quite a few policy positions. Last year, we launched a report called Opportunity for Everyone, where we laid out about 15 policy recommendations for the future of work, things including earned income tax credit, occupational licensing reform, many others. So I think it's any philanthropist who has this dream of sustainability, which everyone I know does, has to look at policy reform as a solution. For me, part of it comes down to simple economics, and I think when you look at the economics of reskilling, there is no way to get from here to there without substantial policy reform. And so even with all of our money combined and the resources of many other philanthropies who are funding reskilling programs, we've got a fundamental misconnect between the amount and direction of money going into the workforce system and the necessary outcomes. So part of that will include employer policy, employer practice change, of course, but how do we get more money flowing to lifelong learning solutions? How do we change and make more flexible dollars so that people can access stackable, ongoing training opportunities throughout the course of their careers? How do we broaden support for non-traditional on-ramps like apprenticeships and so forth? So I think this whole range of things that people point to as solutions really require policy change. And there's a lot going on. I mean, there's a whole regulatory conversation about income sharing agreements that's happening right now. There's short-term Pell modernization. So it's exciting to see that people are having these conversations, but I really think philanthropy, if they want to achieve their vision, has to have a seat at that table and be thinking about how to translate the experimental catalytic things that we're funding into meaningful policy reform.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on Andrew's point that we're still, since we're fairly new still, we haven't done substantial policy work or work with policy groups yet ourselves, but what we have started to do is fund research and pilots, which can help demonstrate the need for how do we encourage more stackable credentials. What do we do to address the number of stopped out adults, those who didn't graduate? And the graduation rates of community colleges in the regions where we fund are stunningly low. Why is that? So I think part of what philanthropy can be doing is just that, is highlighting the issue and the problem and encouraging policy change, because I agree that really the only way to have sustainable change, I mean, philanthropy can throw lots of money at the problem, but in the end, unless you're changing the systems, you're not really going to have sustainable, new sustainable systems and new sustainable programs. I also wanted to add that I think it depends how you define policy, because I don't know that, I mean, certainly we think of state government, we think of what local, local government doing here in Detroit. A lot of things going on. Nicole is involved in some of those, and we have funded Grow Detroit Young Talent, lots of programmatic changes that are not necessarily passed by city council, passed by the state legislature, but are identifying problems and actually identifying solutions that are being implemented on a real-time basis. And I think that's something else where philanthropy can get involved. We like to think of ourselves as pretty nimble and can if we see that there is a new idea being bounced around or discussed, let's pilot something. Let's see what works and learn from it. And we may make mistakes, and we have already, even in our short 5 years' time. But I think that is another role for philanthropy, is that experimentation role.
In the Future of Workers program, we clearly believe that policy is a fundamental way that we can actually better the situation for workers. Talking about how do we, even if you think about what are the more precise ways to actually change the reality of workers, this is actually one of the ways that we can actually accomplish that. And I think there's a couple of ways that we have to think about this. Is the short-term benefit for workers, but also how do you create a space and get ahead of what's coming down the pipeline instead of actually being reactive to actually what's going on in low-wage sectors particularly, and have broader implications. And I think one of the ways clearly that we have been doing that is it's actually, I mean, it's going to sound like a broken record, but actually the importance of actually listening to the experience of workers that are the ones that actually are on the restaurants, that are the that are the domestic workers, that are taking care of your family, that are the ones that actually are in the warehouse, and actually listening to how their situations are, and how they're dealing with the issues of the bracelets that were mentioned this morning, or the conversation of tip minimum wage, sub minimum wage reality of workers, of the reality of how technology is actually increasing their stress, and actually the security in their work, is actually a fundamental way on where to start a policy conversation, right? And I think we have good examples in a couple of ride-sharing examples, actually, in New York, in which workers were one of the first one to actually say, wait a minute, I'm not getting even paid minimum wage. I'm not even getting, I'm not, you know, I'm supposedly have this flexibility, but this flexibility actually is uncalled for, because I have to be kind of attached to this machine all this time, and I have to be concerned about these stars. So it actually is not all the things that it promised. And actually, from those conversations, aggregating the information of all these workers, then actually realizing that we need researchers and other policy experts to actually put the policy in perspective, actually start to develop what are some of the taxi commissioners start thinking about what are some good policies in particular sectors. Similarly, in terms of the Workers' Bill of Rights, that actually are an important way of actually protecting class of workers actually that have been unprotected by our labor infrastructure, majorly based on race, right? As tip minimum wage and domestic worker, due to actually the racial composition of mainly black women, right? And that's actually a reality of this country, similar to that happening in agriculture. So how do we actually start from a point of view of those that are experiencing the worst part of the labor market to then build a policy infrastructure to change the economic condition actually of our society?
Thank you. Now I want to actually go back to something that Lavea, you mentioned earlier on. Can you talk a little bit about how you're thinking about your role as a convener into making sure that people are effectively having these conversations about maybe who's being left out, or where there are sort of systemic issues, and the ways that you would like to see employers or other actors come to the table differently going forward?
Yeah, well, I think this is something that is a challenge, and I think particularly it's a challenge in this country because there's an assumption that the worker is on one side of the table and employers on the other side, and that has been, sort of the traditional, I think, paradigm. But I think that we're all seeing in this sort of new age of changing demographics, changing global economy, and how we need to be playing in a much bigger way in the global economy, that we probably share more in terms of thinking about how to be competitive than we have in the past. And we're just starting to think about how to do this, but one of the things that we're able to do as a foundation is be at the table with some of the top, we're a very place-based organization, probably a little different from the rest of the people here on this panel, because we do fund in two very specific regions. So we interact on a daily basis with some of the top CEOs in our regions, as well as with those who are really trying to just maintain workforce training programs and address those skill-based needs for workers. So we're actually, I think, able to have a bird's eye view of this, maybe more so than a lot of other people. And where we've been going with this is the CEOs group that we sit at the table with here has actually commissioned some research that's really trying to look at where can we tweak the system itself, and where can we start to think about building new kinds of institutions that can help fill these new gaps. So for instance, in Southeast Michigan, there's really no workforce intermediary that could help be that interface between employers that have these really acute needs, particularly in the skills and trades, in the tech arena, the IT, advanced manufacturing, and they're not able to get people to fill those jobs. But on the other side of the table, community colleges are not able to actually create the training programs that would address those needs. So I think one of the things that we need to be thinking about is bringing people to the table to think about what are the institutions that are missing that could help continue to solve the problems we have today and the problems we have in the future, so that we're not just solving on a yearly basis, but more permanence in our institutional, in the institutions we have in the region.
Thank you. One thing I do want to call out is that we do have some questions, or we can take some questions from Slido. So they may come up in a moment, but please, if you have questions, you can enter them there, and we can take a look at some of the things that you all have answered so far. Any other responses?
Can I jump in on one other thing,
Of course.
which I think is related to your question? One of the other things that we've actually found in the work we're doing is that the perception of blue-collar jobs is not what it used to be. And I think that it has to do with a lot of cultural reasons, social change reasons, so that often families that went into, worked in manufacturing for generation to generation have looked at that and said, oh, that's not a good job, that's not for us, that's not for you, the next generation anymore, whereas actually those jobs have changed dramatically. They're not, a lot of them involve the need to understand technology. And I think one of the things we're seeing as in the philanthropy world is how do you change perception, and how do you sort of change how people view those what used to be called blue-collar jobs, and I'm sure I even really like that term. And I think that's something that we're also thinking about, and that's something I think everyone can sort of come together around is, that those jobs are very different than they used to be and need very new skills, very new skill sets.
So there is a question about data and how you use data, not just in the philanthropy world, but in general the social impact world. And I think that the way that we have been using data and we have encouraged people to use data is to get informed where you can do interventions or innovations that change the paradigm and change the trajectory of a problem. Let me give you 3 examples of areas where, thanks to data, you can see. The first one is the typical recruitment system. For years in the marketplace, we have grown used to these applicant tracking systems. And we put algorithms behind, and we have been consciously or unconsciously excluding anybody that does not have a university college degree. The applicant tracking system, automatically the software says, okay, this is the job, designer lead, and automatically excludes everybody that has not a degree. Maybe have all the right skills, all the background, but the software is excluding them. So in IBM, we took a stand to take out those algorithms from our applicant tracking system. And in 2018, we delivered more than 15% of all the thousands of jobs that we hire in the US for people that didn't have a degree, a college degree, a 4-year, 5-year, an MBA. So that way you change some trajectory. Another example, usually in industry, we believe that internships are for the last year of university or the last year, and it's a summer event of 8 weeks. So change the paradigm and says, why people that is in students that are in high school can do internships? Because then the education world and the work can get together. Of course, it's a challenge. If you are in a corporate environment, in a general office environment, having a 16-year-old in the flow of work may be disturbing. The first question, where is the Starbucks? Where can I get a break? My wireless is not connected. So you need to train the organization to take different, break a paradigm. So as part of our PTech initiative, we are helping not just IBM, but industry partners, 600 industry partners worldwide, to change the paradigm and take internships early on in your life. So you know what it is. You really experience. And when I said internships, it means meaningful internship. We didn't get a photocopier person. It has to be part of how you learn and see. And do it early on. So that's another change that can change the trajectory of how traditionally things have been done. Finally, one example on the diversity space and inclusion space is data says that one of the biggest problems to advance women careers is that sometimes because of taking care of family or taking care of personal situations, you are out of the workforce. And the comeback is very different. The traditional way to do it is, okay, look for a job. Do the interviews, go the rounds, and try to get a job. Let's think differently. Not necessarily you are convinced that you are ready. Not necessarily you are convinced that you yet have the skills that you need. So we created something that is called returnships, which is an open agreement for a 6-month hybrid internship and apprenticeship. And you can leave at any moment, no shame. You come, if you like it, you stay. If you don't like it, you go. And after 6 months, you decide if you want to apply. But it's a ramp on back into the workforce that is different than the traditional trajectories. So data can inform actions and innovations that change the trajectory and change the paradigm.
Thanks. I think the second question we have here is, how do we get philanthropies that have the power to take risks without the impact of market consequences to be better at doing that? The things that really that other organizations aren't able to do, which I know we've seen a lot in Detroit in terms of your work funding some of our programs that I think would not have been something we could fund traditionally through our normal sources of workforce funding. So it would be great to hear other folks weigh in on how do you think about the ability to kind of take risks and fund those sort of paradigm shifting opportunities?
I can offer a couple quick thoughts, just personal reflections as opposed to any sort of Google viewpoint, having done this work for a few years now. I think, one, I would echo something that Jose said, which is about sort of beneficiary-informed grant making. And at Google, we have a motto, follow the user and all else will follow. And I think observing a lot of foundations over the years, sometimes we get in a habit where the user becomes the nonprofit, which is a little bit perverse. And I think we all need to really root our risk-taking grant making in the user being the end beneficiary. And so I try my best to spend the most time really getting informed about what the key problems are as opposed to what the market of nonprofits are asking for. The related point I would make is I've been a little bit dismayed about how much herding and network privilege goes into the art of grant making. And so many of the organizations who I see being really successful are building that success on the back of these sort of thick social networks, their credentials, their university degrees, the same sorts of things we see in private venture capital. And so I'm excited, and I think one tool is actually contests and prizes. There's the Lever for Change $10 million Economic Opportunity Initiative that's happening right now. There was the Rockefeller CZI challenge last year or the year before that was seeking out local solutions. So I think that's one tool to sort of crack through the inherent network and privilege bias that happens in this world and perhaps take some risks that wouldn't otherwise be taken.
Yeah, I think we're, I think about that question, we want to actually create the necessary change, norms of business, policy change that actually have impacts on the market. So it's not in absence of the market, but actually influence the market. So actually, low wage worker actually can benefit from market productivity. And I think when I think about that question, we think a lot about basically what we do in philanthropy many times is bet on leadership and a vision, right? And I think that's thinking about without the bells and whistles of organization who can write the best grant, but actually what is the vision, what is the operation of that vision that actually could be laid out in a way that actually will have impact, again, to the people that we care the most in low-wage workers as we do this work. And I think this is something that, some of, I think, one of the most gratifying grants sometimes are the smallest grant that you took that risk and then you double down on that, which actually make a big difference. And building the capacity then on the ground to actually be able to create a systemic change that actually are not necessarily those stellar organizations that we know are doing amazing work also. We're just taking the risk on those emerging leadership.
Thank you. Well, I think we could all probably talk about this for hours, but our time here is up. I know there will be a ton of other conversations, particularly tomorrow during the town hall. So for now, I just want to thank all of our panelists for this great discussion.